Welcome to Fresh Off the Set. I'm Carrie Hawker-Diaz.
And I'm Sarah Jenkins.
And thank you so much for listening today. Hopefully you're having a wonderful day. Now, today's podcast, usually if you've listened to ours in the past, we like to talk about fun things, but we also like to hit the hard topics, the important things. And we're definitely getting a little more serious today on this podcast. And Sarah, I'm so thankful for you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. I really, this was a tough podcast to do. We spoke with Amy, who is an eating disorder specialist, but it was something that I think will resonate with a lot of people. And I have a very close connection to this subject, and we'll get more into that. I talk a lot about kind of my personal story and things I haven't shared before. And honestly, it was a little scary, but I feel like it was, I left feeling so uplifted because I think that kind of my story hopefully will resonate with some people, even one person. And this woman who I spoke with, Amy, she's just incredible. And she really went over a lot of things for people who might be fighting and suffering an eating disorder, red flags to look for, family support. She just was a wealth of knowledge. So it's really important.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people that will be able to relate to it. So we don't want people to feel alone. We want to talk about subjects that people maybe don't talk about enough. And you're so brave to share your story. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, let's get started. All right, I am so excited for this special episode of Fresh Off the Set because today we are sitting down with Amy Harman, who is a therapist and eating disorder specialist. She's also a published author. Amy, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I think what we're going to be talking about is so important. It's something that I have had personal experience with for a long time, actually, and I really value your time and your insight as to this really kind of complex topic to navigate. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here too. I agree that it's such an important topic and it's important to bring awareness to the issue as well.
Absolutely. So I feel like right off the bat, there's a lot of misinformation out there about eating disorders. Can you talk about the definition of what an eating disorder is for people who maybe have some confusion?
Yeah, and it is hard. I understand why they have confusion because our culture does have a lot of disorder around food and around exercise and around our bodies that it's hard to know what is an eating disorder and what's not. And what I will say is that an eating disorder is a diagnosable mental health concern. And it affects not only your mental health, but it often affects your physical health as well. And when eating disorders become severe enough that they're interrupting your daily life, it's taking up a lot of your brain power, your thoughts and your behaviors, that's when we know it's problematic. And it can be deadly, right? So
Right.
It's a very serious issue that does need to be diagnosed. It does need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that you touched on, people think about the physicality, but there's so much mentally to unpack there. I also want to talk about triggers of eating disorders. For me personally, I was bulimic for 13 plus years, and I felt like mine, and it took me a long time to even be able to talk about that because I feel like one of the trademark or hallmarks of those eating disorders are there's a lot of secrecy around them, but it felt like an addiction, and I didn't really even have the tools to connect the dots on what brought it on until years later in my late 20s. I had a pretty healthy body image growing up. I played field hockey, I was athletic, but I started binging and purging the second semester of my freshman year in college. I was across the country in Arizona, a lot of stress, and was far away, not a lot of family support. But truly, like years later, I was sexually assaulted when I was 19, and I think things really took a sharp nosedive after that. And now, 10 plus years later, I can kind of see how that was really the impetus for a lot of what happened. But I think when I was in it, you don't even realize,
Yeah. And, it's so, first of all, I just want to say, thank you for sharing your story like that. It's just so heartbreaking, to hear how people do struggle. And there are things that can lead to an eating disorder becoming such a huge part of someone's life. And so, I'm sorry that you went through that, but I'm happy to hear, that you made it through and you're on the other side of
Yes, very
that.
happy. Thank you.
Yes, I know. And you said something too that's really interesting. You said it feels like an addiction. And that is so true for most of my clients who struggle with eating disorders. It is a very addictive process, if you can even use that word. Some people don't like that word. You can also think of it maybe as a compulsion. And it's funny because before I started treating eating disorders, I was actually working with substance abuse
Oh,
and
interesting.
treating addiction for teens. And then when I went and started working with eating disorders, what I found was a lot of the work that I was doing with addiction related. I could bring in all of those concepts and help people with eating disorders in the same way that I was helping people with substance abuse addiction.
That's incredible. And I mean, yeah, like I definitely feel like for those who have experienced that and been in the thick of it, and that's what we're going to talk about. There is hope, and there are things you can do, and there is life after this all-encompassing, horrific kind of ride that so many people have gone through. But you do feel stuck, and you do feel so addicted. At least I did personally. How can people know? What are some signs if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, and maybe it's not a full-fledged eating disorder yet, but what are some signs that you could give people who maybe they should re-examine their relationship with food?
So, one of the things that people need to look at in their relationship with food is, are they holding rigid rules? Um, Normal eating and a relaxed relationship with food has a lot of flexibility and it has a lot of spontaneity. Like if your friends are like, oh my gosh, it's like 10 o'clock at night, we totally want to go get, a blizzard at Dairy Queen, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some spontaneous things that happen. And the other thing that will happen is sometimes people with eating disorders start eliminating certain foods and certain food groups, and they become more and more afraid of eating. Maybe they'll be uncomfortable eating in front of other people. Um, you,
You just
we can talk
jogged my
about.
memory. Yeah, I long before like ever intermittent fasting, which I feel like has been trendy or like common, a lot of people
Yes.
talk about it the past decade or so. But before that, I remember I coined it the 12-hour rule, where if I ate late at night, I couldn't eat for 12 hours. And I was so hardcore about that. And
Oh,
it was like, it was just
wow.
a weird rule. And I remember, the guy I was dating at the time, he'd be like, let's go get breakfast on the weekend. And I'm like, no, I can't eat till 2 this afternoon. And it was just like a
Yeah.
weird rule that I created for myself. And I not to say that if people do that, maybe you are just practicing intermittent fasting, but I think it was kind of a warning sign if you are doing that
Mm-hmm.
and making up these
Mm-hmm.
weird parameters that maybe you should check kind of your relationship with food.
Yeah, there I hear all kinds of rules like that, and that's one of the questions I ask my clients on the first session. What rules do you have around food? And, they'll come up with lots of different kinds. And, it's funny you bring up intermittent fasting because I'm like, but isn't that an eating disorder? And I know it's maybe not like totally diagnosed, but I'm like, it can't be. Like, I just don't think it's a healthy part of a normal relationship with food. Just
Well,
just
right.
my own
No,
opinion.
and it's fascinating to me because that's a whole other conversation we could go into, which is the diet culture, which is so prevalent. And,
Yes.
there's such a fine line, but and there's so many different ways and diets out there of in quote unquote eating healthy. And I think,
Mm-hmm,
where do you
mm-hmm,
draw the distinction between people who really are just trying to be healthy and fit, and then when it becomes an obsession or potentially
mm-hmm,
life threatening? Um,
mm-hmm.
if you
Yeah,
can
exactly.
if you can support someone who's struggling with an eating disorder, I think that's one of the biggest questions that people have. When I've talked to other people about it personally, I think sometimes people don't realize how prevalent it is. And I've said to friends or, just people in my life, chances are,
Mm-hmm.
if you haven't experienced it yourself, maybe your girlfriend or your wife or your sister or your mom or even husband or son have struggled, how can you help these people in your life? Because so many people, more people than you would ever realize, as you know, have experienced this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really important, I think, for us to do our own work. So, you bring up this topic of diet culture, and I think we have to understand that if someone around us, if we have a loved one who is struggling with an eating disorder, we also have to check ourselves, and we have to say, okay, am I having the kind of relationship with food, the kind of relationship with exercise, which is another symptom, that we haven't really talked about. Am I having an unhealthy relationship with my body? Do I have weight stigma? Am I afraid of being fat? And if we can do like our own work and kind of work that out, then I think that makes a more comfortable place for our loved one so that we can help support them in their journey. Obviously, I'm kind of assuming that you've kind of reached out and you're kind of helping them get help, which is also part of, good support. But then once they're in treatment, we do have to be a place where we can be the normal person. We can be flexible. We can be spontaneous. We can not talk about food, not talk about our weight, not be obsessed about the latest diet trends, so that we are a safe place where our loved one can talk to us about other things like emotions, tough stuff, because part of recovery is not just the food plan and the meal plan. Part of recovery is also that emotional part, and that requires support as well.
Right. The two things that I feel like, and I never went to official treatment. I can go into kind of what worked for me, but I did a lot of reading personally when I was trying to get better over the years, and I think a lot of it was helpful. I did yoga, I did meditation, but the two consistent words that I see coming up over and over are people talk a lot about trauma and also control. Would you say those are the two kind of main reasons that people start to have eating disorders? Are most of them, do they come from trauma? Do most of them come from just a need for control, or are they hand in hand, or kind of like the source of that?
So those definitely can be contributors. Everyone has kind of their own story, and I will say sometimes genetics also plays a role. We're finding out through lots of studies that eating disorders can be passed through our genetics as well.
Wow, that's
and
insane.
So
I've never heard that
isn't
before.
amazing?
Yes, that really is.
Yes.
Wow.
And so, if someone so let's say someone has a family history of eating disorders, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will automatically have an eating disorder. But what that means is that when confronted with trauma or confronted with something where they feel out of control, or confronted with situations of extreme stress or distress, the eating disorder is more likely to come out as a coping skill to handle those big issues in life. And so I wouldn't say necessarily that the trauma caused it, because there are multiple factors that go into it, like genetics and also like our culture, right? If we lived in a culture where everyone just had normal relationships with food and everyone loved their body, probably be less likely for someone to turn to an eating disorder in order to deal with their trauma. Right. And we have seen that in studies that people who live in a Western culture, that's us in the United States, people who live in a westernized culture are more likely to have eating disorders. And that's not to say that other people, it's still out there because it is a genetic component. So it's still out there in other cultures, but it is a higher likelihood to develop in Western countries.
It's less prevalent. What would you say? I'm curious to see what your answer is, because I have no idea. I have twin daughters who are about to turn 1, and I don't even, that's not even on the radar yet, or I don't want it to be, but at such a young age, you see women and men who are really influenced, you said, especially in like Western cultures. How do you hide and shield people from social media, from magazines, from TV, from movies? Like, what do you recommend we do to kind of protect people from, falling into these eating disorders?
Yeah, it's so hard, and you wish you could like just shield them 100%, like wrap up those cute daughters and just put them
keep them away. Exactly. I wish, but realistically, what do you do, and especially as someone that I don't want them to go through really the hell I went through for 13 years. It's something I think about a lot, and I try to be, a good role model for them. And obviously they're so young now, but as they get older, I'm already planning on trying to model healthy body image and, not trying to make food talks weird or have weird eating habits in front of them, do all of the healthy things, but still you worry, because you can't control the world outside. So it's tough. It's scary.
Yeah, well, I commend you for your efforts. I mean, I think that those are all really good things where you can model a healthy relationship with food. You can model positive body image. You can help them discover their own body autonomy, right? So let them know that they have control over their body. And then, like you said, they are going to find out about they are going to hear about diets. They are going to hear about other people who are not happy with their bodies. And the other thing that you can do to help them not develop an eating disorder is to help them with their emotions. Give them the skills and tools that they need to work through and process their emotions that come up, and be a support for them in that way as well, so that they don't have to turn to another coping strategy, a negative coping strategy, in order to solve that inner turmoil and those difficult emotions.
Right. And just like you said, which I hadn't heard before, but it makes sense that it can be hereditary. Some of those patterns, I think, nature versus nurture, hopefully you can kind of at home really start shaping those patterns and positive body image, and give them that support. And I do know, like for me, when that started when I was in college, I didn't really feel like I had much of a support system. So I think that that's something that if you're aware of it, you can do for kids, or if you don't have kids, for a friend or a partner, the biggest thing for me, aside from obviously it just being so all encompassing in my life, is like when I was talking to people and friends and doing research, because I think for me, that was a big part of the healing process, is realizing how prevalent it is. Like I just didn't realize how many people had these disordered eating experiences, and like you said, it can be deadly, which is just so harrowing and scary. Let's talk about the type of treatments that are available for people, because I know, like, obviously people have heard of, there's inpatient, outpatient treatment. What are some of the other types?
So I think it would be helpful to even talk about what even outpatient is, because I have clients who come to me and I'm like, yeah, I can see you on an outpatient basis. And they'll say, what is outpatient?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Some people might not know what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically seeing a therapist, once a week or even 2 times a week or every other week, whatever that is, that's considered outpatient treatment. And so that's kind of the normal way you think of when you think, oh, I'm going to go to therapy, I'm going to do this thing. That's called outpatient treatment, because you're not really in a hospitalized setting. But sometimes, and I always kind of keep tabs on, how my clients are doing, how they're doing when they first call me and first want to set up a session. I want to make sure that outpatient treatment is right for them, because there are some clients who are so severe that I do recommend an inpatient treatment. And that means that, or you can kind of call it residential as well.
Okay.
There is a slight difference between the two, but I think, for our purposes, just understand that basically that means that you go to a facility and you stay there, you live there, you sleep and eat and do all the things in that facility. And maybe you can go out like on passes or different kinds of things, but that's an outpatient, or that's an inpatient level of care.
Okay.
And so people who need to go there are people who are severely medically compromised, or people who just cannot stop their behaviors on an outpatient basis. So there are some times that I'm seeing a client and they're not making progress with me. And I feel like, the longer it drags on, the less likely they're going to have positive outcomes. Right. And so we want to give them the best possible care up front and make it kind of intense if we need to make it intense. And I think in the long run, it saves you time, it saves you agony, probably could even save you money.
Absolutely. I think all of those factors you talked about. I think just having that education or that awareness that there are options out there. I guess just kind of wrapping things up, what advice would you give to someone that just feels like they're in the throes of this and they feel really hopeless? And, this is kind of how I was. I knew that there was treatment options out there. I was daunted by the cost. I went out of state for college. I had like almost 6 figures in student loans. Mm-hmm. And I remember just being like, I don't have rich parents. There's no way I could ever afford to go to treatment. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't want to put that on them because already a lot of my eating disorder was super private. I didn't talk about it. People in my family didn't know until years later. So I imagine there's people like me who really feel like, I even remember early on, like being 18 or 19 and going to my campus. We had like an eating disorder treatment center, and there was always a part of me that wanted to do charity work and philanthropy. And I was like, well, I'd like to give back. And the woman who worked there was so kind, but this is so long ago, but I remember her basically being like, well, that's so sweet of you to want to volunteer your time, but if you're basically in the middle of this, we kind of want to see you on the other side. There's so many reasons I think that people just feel like they can never get out. And what is some professional advice that you would give to people who are struggling? What's kind of the first few steps they could take in the right direction?
Yeah, so people who are struggling, I actually do recommend professional help. I think it is the best way, but I agree with you. There are people out there who really can't find that or feel like they don't have access to that. What I will say is that there's a website called, I call it NEDA, but it's National Eating Disorder Association. So if you go to nationaleatingdisorders.org, they have like a helpline that you can call. They can give you resources. They actually do have recommendations for books you can read, journaling. I love to tell all my clients to journal.
I love that. That's great.
You have to have that awareness. You have to have that awareness of the emotional process that's going on, increasing mindfulness. Yoga is amazing. But I do really recommend therapy if it's at all within someone's grasp. It really does move the process along quite a bit easier.
I agree. It definitely worked really well for me. I tried a couple different therapists. I found one that really resonated with me, and she was kind of more tough love. And I think, that's amazing. So I think it's just important for people to know there is hope out there. And I feel like, I don't know if you ever fully get over it, but I have not had those same patterns for about 3.5 years now. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and I never thought that I would get to this place. I remember thinking truly the rest of my life would be consumed with this. And now when I think back on that, it makes me really sad, but also proud. So I think this is so important, and what you're doing, you really are changing lives by, so many things that you're doing are really helping people have hope. So I thank you for that.
Yes, I hope so. And I love hearing your story too. And I just want to echo that it is possible to enjoy full recovery. I've seen it, in other people. And so many people sometimes feel like you did when you were in the thick of the eating disorder, that this is just going to be the rest of my life. And there are some people who've dealt with it for years and years, maybe decades,
right,
that feel like this is just going to be the rest of my life. And I do hold that hope that full recovery is possible. I hold that hope with all my clients, that full recovery is possible. And I just hope that people listening, can hang in there, and understand that there is another side of it.
Thank you, Amy, so much. Do you have a website or somewhere people can go if they want more information from you? Amy Harman, you're a therapist, eating disorder specialist, and author.
Yes. So you can go to my website. It's reflectwholenesstherapy.com.
Okay.
And then I'm also on Instagram at Amy Harman, LMFT. That's AMYHARMAN. Lots of people spell Harman wrong, especially in Utah, because there's Harman.
Oh, yes. The grocery store chain. Right. I could see that.
Yes.
Okay. HARMAN. Amy, thank you so much.
LMFT, yeah.
LMFT, CEDS. Correct. You have credentials. Yes. Well, it was so lovely speaking with you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. This was nice.
All right. And for listeners, thank you for listening. Please go ahead, if you haven't already, rate, review, and subscribe to Fresh Off the Set. Thanks again, guys.
Congrats, you made it to the end. If you want to continue to freshen up your day, you can watch us on Fresh Living every weekday on CBS Channel 2 in Utah at 1 o'clock. You can also watch us on our YouTube channel, KUTV Fresh Living, and follow us on social media. We will see you next week.